Dire Straits happened before Sting, right?
It did. It's how I met Sting.
Okay, this is what I want to talk about. Sting, he wants to quit the police, start a new group, and you're actually on this island with him and Mark Knopfler.
So he just happened to be on Montserrat. They were on a holiday. Sting looks down the table. He goes, "You're Omar Hakim?" And I go, "Yes." He says, "My manager is in New York City right now looking for you." That's an example of synchronicity right there.
Heyo. It's like he brought you a message in a bottle.
Oh, don't!
And then you do Bring On the Night.
The director of that film, Michael Apted, pulled me over and he goes, "This film is going to change your life." I wasn't just a name on the album cover anymore.
Starring Omar Hakim.
Man, that was only the benefit of alphabetical order. That's all that happened there.
Miles Davis, man, a club days.
To grow up with the sound of Miles and end up playing with them is pretty incredible. He didn't give notes. He gave Marcus Miller a lot of freedom and leeway during the making of Tutu. Found out later on that my dad was friends with Miles.
Really?
And Miles turns around and looks at me and goes, "You didn't tell me this was your father." We were friends with John Coltrane, too, and I remember going to Train's house as a kid.
What? Madonna.
Madonna's coming to New York. We don't want to fly a band out. Can you put a band together for Saturday Night Live? And that's how my relationship with Madonna started.
You were playing like a hybrid acoustic and electronic kit?
Yes, it was a hybrid kit.
Probably the first to be doing it on a stadium level.
I think we could accurately say
you were
that.
actually doing the pitch bend live.
I would do it live because it's fun to play. The snare would go.
Nile Rodgers, you guys work with Daft Punk, Get Lucky. Nile hadn't laid guitar down yet, right?
Hold on, check this out. Nathan wasn't even there when I did my drums. It was a whole different rhythm section. And I noticed when I went into the control room that they were keeping a log based on BPMs, keys, and groove description of what we were recording. They were creating a license-free loop library for themselves. Work for hire. So I never heard the song Get Lucky in the studio. That was the first time I heard it. It was on the radio.
So even without you hearing music, you still knew exactly where to open the hi-hats. And everything.
Go. Let's go.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to part 2 of my interview with the great Omar Hakim. If you didn't watch part 1 yet, I highly recommend you go back and watch it. We go deep into Omar's work with David Bowie, the whole Let's Dance album, working with Nile Rodgers, his work with Weather Report, how he met Miles Davis, a bunch of crazy stories, and of course, the Money for Nothing story with Dire Straits and having to re-record the drums on that whole album. It's really amazing. But here we are at part 2, so stick with us. It's amazing. I loved talking with Omar. He's such a great guy, as you will see. So we kick this off coming straight out of doing the Dire Straits session with Money for Nothing and how Omar meets Sting and how Sting was actually looking for him. It's a crazy story. I'm sure you'll love it. And then that Sting gig ends up becoming Grammy winning and just an amazing chapter of Omar's life. Then we continue into his work with Madonna, Daft Punk, playing on Get Lucky, and a lot of other things. So I hope you enjoy. And without further ado, here is my conversation with the amazing Omar Hakim. Sting sings the background vocals on Money for Nothing.
Yes, he does.
And the I Want My MTV hook and everything. So what happens? How does that happen? And this is you meeting Sting for the first time?
Okay, so when we get done with the song, he does his overdub. He's hanging out in Montserrat, not for the session.
When you say he does his overdub, you're talking about Sting?
Yeah.
Does he just walk in? Does Mark tell you Sting's going to come? And how does he all of a sudden sing? That's like not a normal thing to just have Sting do this overdub.
Because that studio in Montserrat, Air Studio,
yeah,
the island is so beautiful that when he wasn't working, he would just go there for holiday.
Nice.
So he just happened to be on Montserrat hanging with Trudy. They were on a holiday.
Wow.
And so they visit the studio. And Mark says, "Hey, you want to sing something on this?" And, and then after that, we go to the kind of dinner, the lounge, dinner table. I'm sitting on one side of the table. Now, for some reason, we weren't introduced yet. Trudy and Sting and Mark at the other end of the table.
Trudy is Trudy's Sting's wife.
Sting's wife.
His second wife, yeah.
And he starts talking about leaving the police. and talking about his new band project. And I was like, oh, interesting. This is right after the Synchronicity album, so they're like huge at this moment.
Huge.
Yeah. The number one rock and roll band in the world probably at this moment.
Yeah.
And he said, I've been talking to Branford Marsalis. And that's when my ears perked up. It's like, oh. And then he's connected me with his colleague Kenny Kirkland. They play together with Branford's brother Wynton Marsalis. My other ear perks. I'm like, oh, this is very interesting. And then he said, and I'm not going to play bass, so I'm thinking about getting Daryl Jones, who plays for Miles. And then that's when I was like, whoa, all right, that's so I say, well, you found your drummer. I look down the table and I just rudely interrupt and interject. Well,
and you haven't even formally met.
We haven't formally met yet. And I go, well, you found your drummer. And Mark Knopfler goes, oh, guys, listen, I'm sorry. I forgot to introduce you, Sting. Say hello to Omar Hakim. Omar, this is Sting. And Sting looks down the table. He goes, you're Omar Hakim? And I go, yes. He says, my manager is in New York City right now looking for you.
Oh, my God.
My manager is in New York City right now looking for you. I will call him and tell him you're here.
Wait. So he doesn't realize that he's sitting at the table with Omar Hakim, and Omar Hakim is the drums that was just on the Dire Straits album that he just cut on Money for Nothing. He doesn't realize you're sitting next to him. He told his manager, probably go find Omar Hakim. I love this guy's sound or whatever. And you're actually on this island with him and Mark Knopfler, sitting at dinner with him after he just tracked vocals on Money for Nothing, in which that is you on
putting
drums.
it all together.
and you're eavesdropping. You're eavesdropping on. You're not even in the combo. You're just listening on him telling Mark that he wants to quit the Police, start a new group. He's talking with Branford. He's talking with Kenny.
Crazy.
And you just interject, saying you found your drummer. He's like, who is this guy?
Yeah, imagine that.
Not realizing that it's the drummer that he wants.
That's wild.
Come on, Omar.
That's wild.
So he says, my manager is in New York looking for you.
Looking for you right now. So we exchanged numbers. And I said, when I'm done, I'll call you when I get back to New York. I'll call you as soon as I arrive home. I always make a joke. I always tell people, well, that's an example of synchronicity right there.
Hey-o. Ding. It's like he brought you a message in a bottle down to that island. Sorry. We're sorry, Sting.
Yeah, we can't.
We're sorry, Sting.
We have to.
He's used to it.
Yes, he is. Yeah, and so I did, in fact, call him the moment I got back to New York. And he told me that he's been at SIR listening to musicians and auditioning guys. So I said, well, I could, you just tell me when to come by, He said, well, I'll organize it so, maybe you and Branford and everybody will be there together. So when I got there, the band that became the band, that was, Branford, Kenny Kirkland, Daryl Jones, and myself, and Sting on guitar. The moment we played together, the chemistry was just, it was ridiculous, like at the first rehearsal.
That is insane.
I might have even made a silly joke at the rehearsal, like, all right, so when do we start? Because I was like such a, jokester, I was like,
And he, I believe, right, he was offended you because of Weather Report specifically.
Yeah,
right?
He loved Weather Report. And he even asked me, he said, is that you playing on Let's Dance? And I said, yeah. So we had to talk about Bowie and other things, but we talked about Weather Report a little, and he asked me about my work with David.
Wow.
So in many ways, I thought it was interesting, because again, I think they always talked about it as being Sting's jazz group, but in my mind, that wasn't a jazz record. That was a record that had jazz sensibility, maybe. But, It was also, there was a couple of pop hits on that record.
Absolutely.
From the drumming perspective, in my mind, I wasn't making a jazz record. I was making a pop record, a rock record.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think that I was a good choice for the first project in that I could bridge the jazz language with pop and rock understanding. the languages.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the mission was, to make a debut record for Sting that, of course, it was going to have the hit, the hit single. You
Yeah.
know? I mean, he had a history of making hit records and writing incredible hit songs, but it was at this moment was about doing it under his name,
Yes.
with his fingerprint, with this collaboration of guys to create a new sound for him.
Absolutely.
And so
Wow.
it was a beautiful experience. There was not one bad show on that tour, musically.
And that tour is so crazy. And it's such a big moment because it's Sting's first band after the Police.
Yeah.
So there's so much going on that he builds this all-star group. The Dream of Blue Turtles.
Yeah.
The album gets tons of Grammy noms. It gets Album of the Year nom, right? It gets crazy recognition.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but if you're watching this podcast and enjoying it, and if you aren't subscribed already, please like, subscribe, follow wherever you are listening. It would help us a lot, and we promise to keep the show going. Back to the show. And then you do Bring On the Night.
That's right. The film. That's right.
Oh, man. Bring On the Night is so great. And you guys win 2 Grammys on Bring On the Night. But what I love about Bring On the Night is that right in the beginning, it's starring Omar Hakim.
Man, that was only the benefit of alphabetical order. That's all that happened there.
Well, the word benefit hits really strong right there. So
yes, it does.
I love that film, dude. That film. If anyone hasn't watched that film, go watch it. If you haven't in a long time, but amazing. And yeah, I love you with the first credit, the Omar credit.
It's funny because the director of that film was a guy named Michael Apted. And Michael Apted had already been doing like some action Hollywood films and some other stuff. He was already like a pretty busy, well-known director. And so after we shot the drum solo sequence, because basically that drum solo that they featured in the film was cut during the show. But then Michael Apted said, listen, Omar, I would like to have you come back with the band, and then I want to get cameras around you, and I want you to play that drum solo again for me, and so we could film it up close. And I said to Michael, but I don't know what I played because it was an improv. It wasn't like I played this for 3 bars and that for 4 bars, and it wasn't a composed drum solo.
Yeah.
It was a complete improv. So he said, well, we'll just do it a few times. As you listen to it, just, and as it's going by, just catch things as you remember doing them. Right? So I was like, okay. So I did my best. Like I listened to it a couple of times and then I sort of got the shape of it. And so the close-up shots, like if there was a certain pattern that I did, I was like, oh yeah, I remember what I did. And so I was able to do it as a close-up concept.
Yes.
But a lot of the wide shots were the original footage. And then some of that stuff was the next day when he asked me to come back and try to recreate. And I did the best that I could so that they could get close-ups.
Yeah.
But when we were done, he said, you should come to the dailies and see this. The dailies are when they finish the work, you go the next morning, they've developed the film, and then the people, the directors, and they can have a look at it. And Michael Apted pulled me over and he goes, listen, man, I just want you to know that this film is going to change your life.
Wow.
He said that to me. He said,
wow.
Based on what I saw in the camera, he said, this film is going to change your life. And I didn't know what that meant, because I didn't, you know what I mean? I was just there kind of doing the best that I could do. I wasn't thinking about anything else but the music.
Right.
But when I saw it, and when we went to the premiere and I saw it, I was like, whoa, okay. I think I understand what Mr. Apted was trying to express.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it did. And it
He was like, by the way, I decided to do alphabetical at the front of the movie, so your name's going to be the first one.
like I said, I don't
Man,
know about all that, but
No, it's amazing because the film grabs you right from the beginning, and
Yeah.
the way Sting introduces you and the band and everything. It's like it's so captivating immediately, and then the performance. You guys look like you're having so much fun the whole time, and your drum set looks particularly very fun to play on that run. Whoa.
It was a beautiful experience.
Wow.
And a band with a really great chemistry.
Clearly.
Kenny Kirkland is just such an amazing musician. They're all amazing. You know, when we lost Kenny, it was a real bummer.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was a special pianist, keyboardist, not just a great jazz player, but a great everything player.
Absolutely.
And man, talking about grooves and stuff that would happen on those gigs, man, it was over the top, man.
Oh, you all were killing. Like that was what an ensemble, honestly, amazing. So how did it end up changing your life?
Well, I think that it just showed me in a different light to the general public. I think up until that point, because I didn't tour with David Bowie, but I did a lot of pop and rock records. I was a name on the back of an album cover.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, except unless you were a Weather Report fan and you saw me playing with Weather Report, or in some of the other, like when I was touring with David Sanborn, and you know, I was out there doing things, but I think that the Sting experience, summer of the entire year of 1985, was a year that introduced me to a larger, wider general audience that, you know, discovered me. I wasn't just a name on the album cover anymore, you know?
Yes.
You know, I'm in a film now. That's a whole different vibe.
And you're so captivating, man. You look so cool. You're crushing it on the drums. Like, I feel like, I don't know, I was just a fan back then, just being like, I want to know this guy.
Oh man, that's nice, man. Wow.
So next month, I'm going to be with Sting. We're going to Sicily.
Oh, wow.
For Kate's wedding, Fuchsia, his daughter.
Nice.
Is there anything that I can say to him from you that would get him to smile or something?
Just send my love, man, and tell him I've been seeing his new trio on YouTube, and they're kicking it out there and they're having fun. And it sounds good.
I want to see that show. Yeah, the show looks great.
Yeah, it's fun, man. No, he's a special artist. Send my regards to he and Trudy.
I will, absolutely. Okay, so Miles Davis, man. Okay, so I knew you worked with Miles, but I did not know that you went so far back with Miles to the club days. So, what was Miles like? What was working with him like?
Miles was he really liked me. He talked to me a lot during the making of Tutu. And after we finished cutting something, I would sit in the lounge and just hang with him, and he was mad cool. What style, and just vibe and history, and when he's an iconic figure of my childhood.
Absolutely.
I talked about the first musicians I heard upon arrival on the planet. And one of the records that was always playing in my house was Kind of Blue, which was recorded the year I was born.
I love Kind of Blue. Yeah.
To grow up with the sound of Miles, during my childhood, to grow up with the sound of Wayne and all of these guys and end up playing with them is pretty incredible,
That's amazing.
It is amazing, man.
So with you being someone that Miles liked, like what was his energy like? Because, a lot of times as never getting to meet him, just watching interviews, he seemed very intense a lot of the time, right? So what was he like to a friend, to a peer?
Well, no, he was actually a gentle spirit. Had a great kind of deadpan sense of humor. He had a way of, delivering funny stories, like I said, in this kind of dry way, but then he would hit you with the punchline. You'd be like, oh, okay. Miles. But I dug him. I didn't tour with him either. I just did those records. You know what I mean? It was a wonderful experience. Not enough. I didn't spend enough time with him. I didn't have the fortune, like I said, of going on tour. but
Right.
to spend the time with them, you know, in the studio and to help them do those records. It was Miles Davis. I mean, you know, it was, whew, what can you say, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Do you remember any particular notes or anything he would give on your drums?
He didn't give notes.
Wow.
In fact, Marcus Miller, he gave Marcus Miller a lot of freedom and leeway during the making of Tutu.
Mm-hmm.
And he really trusted Marcus. And because Marcus and I had a vibe because of our history, you know, that we were at a point at that time where there wasn't a lot of discussion about what needed to get done. I could hear what he was doing and know exactly what to play.
Yeah.
And then and if I was going in the wrong direction, he would let me know. But I think that we were sort of in a moment of, you know, our personal signature on our instruments was sort of, I don't know, I guess you could say evolved enough that we could, you know, we could go in and make things happen. And Miles was very satisfied with the results.
That's beautiful.
It was a big deal for me, though.
Oh my God, must have been.
My mom and dad loved Miles. In fact, I found out later on that my dad was friends with Miles.
Really?
I didn't know that because my dad didn't talk about that a lot. I mean, we were friends with John Coltrane too, and I remember going to Train's house as a kid.
What?
Well, Train lived like a few blocks away from us in Jamaica, Queens. A lot of Jamaica, Queens neighborhood was incredible. The musicians that lived there. Like I said, James Brown had a house there. John Coltrane lived there. Count Basie lived there. And then you fast forward into the 80s, and then there's Q-Tip and the hip hop scene, Salt and Pepper, Run DMC. You know, there was the music scene, Don Blackman, Lenny White. When I think about, you know, the people from Jamaica, Queens, Marcus Miller, you know, it was an incredible music community. But my mom and dad were friends with John and Naima, so their daughter would babysit me, and when they would go out, hang, I would be there with Saida, you know, very young, you know.
That's crazy.
And I also remember going to Art Blakey's house in Harlem with my dad because they were friends. And so I was around these people. But when Miles did Night Music, the David Sanborn TV show, I told my dad, I said, you got to come through. And so when he said, I'm definitely coming through, I want to see Miles. And so when he came backstage and Miles saw him, they embraced. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. And Miles turns around and looks at me and goes, you didn't tell me this was your father. And I was like, I was really confused. I was like, well, you know, my dad didn't really talk about Miles a lot. He loved Miles, and we would listen to Miles all the time, you know. And I was like, wow, that was really a heavy moment, you know. But when I think about the community,
yes,
you know, there were a bunch of jazz musicians back then that were, you know, they were converting to the Islamic faith, right? And so a lot of them would go to mosque together, you know. I think Art Blakey, Dizzy Gillespie, they didn't change their names, but some of them did, some of them didn't. And they, you know, that was, you know, it was like a movement of, you know, getting rid of the slave names and moving into a, you know, a new awareness and a new culture, you know, cultural perspective for them in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, right? So I guess that Art Blakey, John Coltrane, Dizzy, I did some work with Dizzy Gillespie. And it was interesting that I was connected to the jazz community in that way, even though I really branched out into rock music and pop music because of my interest. And just because being a teenager in the 70s, you know,
it changed, yeah.
And then the evolution of the rock fusion thing.
Yeah.
That Weather Report was a part of, you know, and it's interesting that all of those bands actually came from Miles.
Absolutely.
You know, Miles is the catalyst. So it was a really interesting sort of setup in many ways. And so that to grow up around those people and actually see them as a child, as a kid, as a young kid. I remember driving by Roy Haynes' house. There's Roy, he's mowing the lawn and the kids outside, you know, and Hollis Avenue. You know what I mean? It's just like
unbelievable.
It was no big deal. You know, you would just see these people.
So when that happens with Miles and you find that out about your dad, like, does that get your dad to open up at all? Did you get the stories out of him?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, he just talked about, he said that, you know, he just wasn't ready to be on the road anymore. By the time I was born, he was just like, you know, he wanted to settle down. Yeah. Sort of have his own band, and you know what I mean? And
he played trombone?
He played trombone.
Yeah.
And he left home also very young with the Louis Armstrong big band.
Whoa.
He was 16 when he left home.
Wow, you've really like followed in your dad's footsteps in a different way, of course, different path, but the young touring, and
it's very interesting, the family business.
Wow. Playing with the greatest legends at the time and being around everyone, that's crazy, Omar. Wow.
It is crazy. And again, when you're young, you don't actually understand it. You know what I mean? You don't see it that way at first. It's only in retrospect when I review my memory about it, I'm like, whoa, this is like Miles and Train and Art Blakey, and you know what I mean? And these people. And I remember going to the Club Ruby in Jamaica, Queens, and it was like one of the jazz stops on a jazz tour in America, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, I could go there, and you know, we would see Rahsaan Roland Kirk playing, you know, 3 horns at a time, and you know, on the Jazz Brunch Sunday, you know, you know what I mean? And so there was a deep exposure to all kinds of music, and then you put the history in perspective, the civil rights movement,
mm-hmm.
the jazz as a voice of revolution in a way, you know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what was being expressed from the jazz musicians, and how the convergence of jazz and rock at that time, you know, was really serving the same purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saxophones and trumpets, and you know, they had electric guitars and pianos, but there was even talk of a Miles Davis, Jimi Hendrix collaboration. I remember reading about that.
Whoa.
As a kid, and I got really excited about it. And then Hendrix died like a month after that announcement. So that never happened.
Can you imagine?
I was heartbroken because I was like, when I read it, I was like, all right, that's going to be insane. Jimi Hendrix and Miles, like, that's going to be nuts. And then Hendrix left us.
That would have changed the whole world, the whole path of music.
Yeah, because stuff was already changing. You know what I mean? But that would have been a very, you know, I guess they call it a seismic change. And it was already intense. I mean, when I look back and I think about, you know, what Miles was doing, the emergence of Sly and the Family Stone, you know, with one of the first multiracial, multicultural, multigender bands challenging the civil rights mindset of that time period, and then the Beatles, and you know what was happening with the British artists, you know, and then along comes Earth, Wind and Fire, and with their message.
Wow,
this was a heavy time of spiritual exploration, political upheaval, the war in Vietnam, Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On" album.
Yeah,
you know, through the music, people were changing the world and changing perspectives. Mm-hmm. Even you know, like I remember reading, I think I saw it this morning, where Motown was afraid to put out the "What's Going On" album.
Wow.
But you know, Marvin Gaye had to threaten to leave the label, and they put it out, and it ended up being one of the biggest records they ever put out.
Absolutely.
You know, because it was time for it. You know, so all of that music, when you think about what Miles was doing and what Sly was doing and what the Beatles were doing and what, you know, so many other bands, you know, it was a heavy time to grow up in as a young musician, and then to be a teenager in the 70s and observe this evolution and then fit myself into it. Like, okay, so where's my place in all of this, you know, because
Yes.
I'm playing bebop with my dad, but then my friends are playing funk and rock, but then this fusion thing is happening over here with the Mahavishnu Orchestra and Return to Forever and Weather Report and people really experimenting. These instruments are kind of new. Like we don't even think about the fact that the Fender Rhodes, the Oberheim synthesizer, the ARP Odyssey, these instruments were still new at the time.
Brand new.
They were
Being
brand new.
explored right in front of you. Yeah.
You know what I mean? We don't think about it like as new. The Fender Rhodes was a new keyboard. And to see Keith Jarrett, the way he played the Fender Rhodes with Miles, the way Joe used the Fender Rhodes in the Weather Report records.
Yeah.
And even though that was an electronic instrument, it was interesting because you could tell the difference between when Chick played a Rhodes, when Herbie played a Rhodes, when Stevie Wonder played a Rhodes. Did I say Herbie Hancock? Like you could hear their thumbprint on it right away. Everybody sounded different.
Absolutely.
Keith Jarrett, I mean, that was a vibe on Rhodes, So this was a wonderful time. Stanley Clarke, Jaco Pastorius. When I think about the time, Billy Cobham, man. I mean, God, I saw the Mahavishnu Orchestra at Queens College.
Whoa!
I was in the audience for that. It was remarkable to see Billy Cobham, Jan Hammer, Mr. Goodman on violin, Rick Laird, John McLaughlin play In a Mounting Flame and Birds of Fire live.
Oh.
Do you know Jack Black talk about getting your face melted?
Yeah. It's the face melt.
Everybody's face was melted at
face melt.
Yeah. That was a real face melt right there.
Absolutely. That's the most extreme music coming out. That's like Billy Cobham just pulverizing you and coming off those 2 albums. Come on.
My cousin, I had a cousin, it was one of those, your mom's best girlfriend's kids are your cousins, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So my cousin, he was the one that really got me deep into rock and jazz fusion. And so I remember going to his house and he played In a Mounting Flame for me. And I just didn't know what to do with it at first. I need like a palate cleanser. Like, okay, you need to put a Temptations record on for me right now so I could so I could come back.
You're like, did you speed this up?
Yeah.
What are those? Those are single strokes? Yeah.
Yeah, we need a sorbet to cleanse the palate. But after that, you know what? It was like 6 months later was the most beautiful music to me that I had ever heard. Like once my ear understood it, and once that my brain, I had to evolve to it. You know what I mean? And then I was like, whoa, this is beautiful. This is like, this is special. This is so I had all of that feeding my young brain.
Man, and all these projects you're talking about all stood the test of time, right? They're still the most incredible, mind-blowing albums today.
Oh yeah.
All of them. All of these projects.
Man. Oh yeah.
All these sounds. These are instruments still being explored today. These are the instruments that are desirable still today. Like
it's incredible.
It's amazing. And to keep going on new instrumentation, I want to talk about drums and electronic drums and everything. And correct me if I'm wrong, but so you talk about big tours, right? So now you okay, you've done the big tours, now the big pop tours, right? You're out with Sting. And then you do Madonna, right? So that Madonna stadium tour, huge tour.
Big tour, man.
So I heard that essentially you were playing like a hybrid acoustic and electronic kit on that tour?
On the first tour with Madonna, yes, it was a hybrid kit. It was early days of Akai samplers.
And you were the first person to really do this at that level.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. But I was early in, for sure. I was definitely early in. Because Bill Bruford was also experimenting with Simmons drums and stuff in London. And so this is kind of when I got with Madonna was like 90s, early 90s. And also I had been messing with drum machines and Simmons drums and all kinds of stuff in the 80s as well. So I would say with confidence, I was an early adopter. Whether I was one of the first, I'm not sure.
Right, but you were probably the first to be doing it on a stadium level and the context in which, like, how it translates today with drum triggers and pop tours and how normal
I think
is.
that might be that. I think we could accurately say that. And it was interesting because I had to solve some problems, and I needed to make a system that was expressive as a MIDI device, and I needed to have a system that I could have like a lot of control over, and I wanted to attach expression pedals to the samplers. And so there was one device that did that better than all the others. It was called the Drum Cat. Mario DeQuitis, I think his office was somewhere in the Boston area. And I heard about the Drum Cat and what it could do. And it was one of the first boxes that he had designed pedals and switches and things that. So I was able to connect that, grab samples from her records, load them into an Akai, probably one of the earlier machines.
Yeah.
I could basically put the triggers on the drums so that the engineer could blend the natural drum sound with the stuff that was coming off the Akai samplers.
Yeah.
But then there were a couple of things, like on some of those Madonna records, like those dance records, they would have these snare drums that were like 808 and 909 snares, but you would hear the drum fill, the snare would go, it would pitch bend down.
Yes.
Right? And so I was like, all right, well, I need to assign a pitch bend pedal to that sample so that when I do that fill, I could take my foot off the hi-hat and get the. So I did all of this programming on the Drum Cat that let me put expression pedals that I could have pitch bend snares and hand claps of.
Whoa! So you were mimicking you were actually doing the pitch bend live.
I would do it live because it's fun to play. I didn't want to.
Yeah.
I didn't want her to sequence me because I wanted the kind of the fun of actually doing what I was hearing.
Wow, it's so cool.
So that was fun. And we made it work. I had a great drum tech who helped me get all that together. And we put the hours in. And then I ended up staying with her for about 8 years. I never thought that I was going to be with her that long. I thought it was just going to, I got called from her manager, Freddie DeMann, because I had been working with Lionel Richie from the Commodores. He was a huge star in the 80s, as we know. Anybody who
of course
knows that history. And
one of the most charming guys I've ever met in my entire life.
Just a sweetheart, man.
Sweetheart, yeah.
He had called me in the early 80s, but we didn't connect until like around, it was kind of like 88, 89. And he put a band together to do some promo gigs for a new record. The band was awesome. Nathan East, Greg Fillinganes, Carlos Rios on guitar, myself, Peter Michael Escovedo on percussion. It was a dope band. And we did some touring around Europe. What was fun about that band was everybody in that band could sing. So the background vocals sounded like a record.
Yeah.
Like nobody sang out of tune. The harmony, was perfect. It was crazy how great that band was. And Greg Fillinganes all of those guys are just insane musicians.
That's amazing.
And so we went on tour with Lionel and then came back to LA. I did a record with him. I forgot the name of that album. A really lovely record. Did some more dates. And then after that, his manager, Freddie DeMann, who also managed Michael Jackson and Madonna. Imagine the fortune of managing the three biggest stars in the galaxy at that moment. He said, Madonna's coming to New York. We don't want to fly a band now. Can you put a band together for Saturday Night Live? And that's how my relationship with Madonna started. I put a band together
for an SNL gig.
An SNL gig. I got Victor Bailey. I got Michael Bearden. I think Bashiri was on that, the percussionist. Anyway, it was a cool band. She loved it. She said, "I'm taking you guys on tour." And I didn't think much of it because, when artists are excited and they say stuff and I'm like, all right, I'm not going to hold her to that. She's going to get back to LA and she's going to get back with her other band and we'll be forgotten. We'll be soon forgotten. But 4 months later, I got the call Freddie called. She said, all right, Madonna's looking for you. What's happening? Can you do this? And I was like, yeah. And we worked it out. And so myself and Michael BEARDEN, and who's a genius keyboard player. And
I love Michael. Michael's been on the pod.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I love Michael.
Yeah, he's like arranger, producer, orchestrator. Remember that show, Living Color, the comedy show?
Yep.
Michael's Hey Man. He could, hey man, how many jobs you got? He's an arranger, a producer, an orchestrator.
Michael does it all.
He does it all and really well.
So comfortably, so cool.
Oh my God, just a mad genius.
Every time I talk to him, like, what's going on, man? And he's like, well, and then he just lists.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That was, even back then, that was him. So we got him.
That's so great.
Victor Bailey on bass, myself, and then we kind of merged with the LA band of Luis Conte.
Wow.
Oh, Paul Pesco, who's actually in my new band, guitars.
That must have been fun to lock with Luis Conte.
Luis Conte is...
And you guys were both on these big risers.
Yeah,
like
exactly,
your
man.
Monster rigs.
Exactly. Jay Winding was the MD, her longtime MD. So that was a lovely band.
I'm excited to let you know that we built the most requested feature in JamCard, and it's out now. And it is our first job board. If you're a JamCard member, update the JamCard app, and you will see at the bottom, jobs. Click that, and you can see a bunch of different job opportunities, and you can apply for those jobs. Also, if you are looking to hire someone or contract them, whether it's for a tour or a recording session or for a brand collaboration, you can also post your own opportunities in there. So JamCard members, go update the app, and you can see the new jobs feature. If you are a music professional and you are not yet a JamCard member, make sure to go to jamcard.com and you can apply to join the biggest and best network in the music industry for free. Jamcard.com. JAMMCARD.com. Let's go. Your lifelong Nile Rodgers journey continues as you guys work with Daft Punk and play on Get Lucky, which ends up becoming, incredibly successful, one of the most feel-good, amazing songs of a lifetime. And I had Nathan East on the pod.
Yeah.
And I got his story of Get Lucky and how it came together, but I would love to hear it from your perspective.
Okay.
You and Nathan did it first, like Niall wasn't there yet. Niall hadn't laid guitar down yet, right?
Hold on, check this out. Nathan wasn't even there when I did my drums.
Oh,
he wasn't there. In fact, it was a whole different rhythm section. When they flew me to LA, they flew myself, the bass player James Genus, who's playing with Herbie Hancock and also works on the Saturday Night Live band. They flew James and I out to work with Chris Caswell, who had been their arranger in the studio and keyboard player. So the idea was to go in the studio and to basically cut like these jams on a click. Now, Tomas, the taller of the two robots, had a keyboard rig set up at the studio. Guy, he had his DJ set up at the studio. And Tomas would have these kind of 2-bar, 4-bar riffs, and then Chris Caswell would also play them. And so me and James Genus would go in, and they would show us the riff, and then we would jam on that riff for 15 to 20 minutes, and they just let it roll. And we would do a half dozen of those or more a day. And I noticed when I went into the control room that they were keeping a log based on BPMs and keys and sort of groove description of what we were recording. And then what I realized was they were creating a license-free loop library for themselves. Work for hire. You know what I mean? It's like,
oh no.
It was like a record construction kit, of original
with the greats.
With original content, right? That they could use in a log because they could go, okay, well, that one is in F and it's 115 BPM. Grab that. Or we could use if we have another one that was done with Nathan East and J.R. Robinson in the same key and the same BPMs, we could put that on with Omar's drums. Or maybe we'll have Nate come in and just overdub on these drums. You know what I mean? So I never heard the song Get Lucky in the studio. In fact, I never heard any of those songs in the studio.
Whoa.
I wasn't there playing songs. I was there playing grooves and loops and just jamming to a click track.
Wow.
And the genius of what they did was they, after the fact, constructed this stuff together.
That's incredible.
It's insane.
So even without you hearing music, you still knew exactly where to open the hi-hats. And the perfect hi-hat opening by Omar Hakim. Sorry.
But it's true. I mean, and the truth is there was music. There were grooves, there were riffs, there were things. But because of the way they recorded them, they could take those other elements away and they could just have this drum track. Like, for instance, one of the songs, Giorgio by Moroder, is both me and JR on the record. Right? And he did that 3 months before at a different studio altogether. I think they recorded that at A&M.
So how did you even find out what you played drums on?
Not until the record came out.
And then they credited, it was just the credits in the album?
They credited it after a while. But it's funny. So the first time I heard Get Lucky, we were my wife and I, Rachel and I were driving in a car. Maybe we were on tour in Europe. I don't remember. We were in the car, though, when we heard it. It came on the radio or something. And so with her being a musician, she goes, wow, that hi-hat vibe sounds like you. She said it, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, maybe, but that's definitely Nile. And that's definitely Pharrell. So I didn't know that Pharrell had sang. I didn't know that Nile played on it. I knew nothing.
Wow.
So I'm listening to this. I'm up all night to get lucky. It's got a nice pocket on it. I'm listening to it.
Nice pocket. It's yourself.
And then and I hear Nile though. I was like, that's definitely Nile.
Yeah.
And then the hi-hat thing, I was like, yeah, that definitely sounds like something I would do. It sounds like something I would do, but I didn't recognize the song. Then the DJ comes on afterwards and goes, that was a new one from Daft Punk. I was like, that is me. That was the first time I heard it. It was on the radio.
Whoa.
I think I called the office in LA. They sent me this really cool package. It was like a vinyl collector's package with like the CDs and some thumb drive with the 96K files. It was really a crazy, incredible package.
That's insane.
It is insane. And then the record, we all know what the record did. And then they called me and asked me to play the Grammys. And I was honestly surprised because, I thought because JR lived in LA and I lived in New York, maybe, they wouldn't, he's right there,
Yeah.
But I think because I played on Get Lucky and they were planning on doing Get Lucky.
Yeah.
Was why they flew me out, because I actually played on that particular song that they wanted to do.
It was everyone from the record except for plus Stevie Wonder.
Yeah, exactly. It was everyone from the record plus Stevie, and what a night that was.
Because it's still Nathan, Nile,
me,
them,
Chris
Pharrell,
Caswell, the Robots.
and bonus Stevie Wonder. Did they look at you and say, your life's going to change after this Grammy performance?
No, they did not. Well, we rehearsed about a good week to get that presentation going, just to get it right.
That's one of the best Grammy performances ever, in my opinion.
Wow.
I love that.
Wow.
That is
Special.
That's iconic, with this whole stage design, with the studio and everything.
Yeah.
As if you recorded it together in the studio, which you didn't. That was the only time you were ever in a studio. And it was a fake studio.
Hey, man.
Ironic.
Magic of record making,
Very alien of them to do.
Yes, very exactly. No, it was these are wonderful experiences, man.
That's so cool. Was that you also on Lose Yourself to Dance?
I think that's JR.
That JR? Okay.
I think. I'd have to go back and look at the credits. JR has an unmistakable stomp, on the kick drum. It's like he ain't playing with you with that kick drum, man. You're gonna be up on the
kick, you got the hi-hat.
Oh no, you're gonna be on the dance floor when he gets done with you.
Oh man. I love that, dude.
Yeah, man. No, he's that. In fact, the first time I saw him, I was actually on tour with Sanborn in 1980. I was a huge Rufus and Chaka Khan fan. And then we were opening for Rufus and Chaka at the Chicago Fest. And they come out with this new drummer, J.R. Robinson. And I was like, yo, that dude, the bass drum stomp. In fact, I think they had a record called Stomp. I think Quincy Jones produced it. And it was
That's so cool.
It was crazy, man. And I think Quincy produced that record around that time that they did.
Yeah.
And it was a record that JR played on. And man.
Yeah, and that changed JR's life because then
Yeah.
Quincy brought JR in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. He played on all those hits.
Yeah.
JR said, so I ran into him at a NAMM show. This is a funny story. And hey, JR, we're talking. And I said, we should exchange the numbers. I don't know if I have your latest number. He said, no problem. He just gave me his card. So on the card, I'm looking on the card, and I just kind of glanced at it, and I saw the design was like his name, his number, and then a staff with some notes on it that were kind of going like this across the front of the card, right? I was like, okay, got it, And I said, I'll send you a text later with my number. So I get home, I get back to the hotel, and I pull out his card, and I look at it really closely. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. That's not just a design, the staff design. And I read it. It was written out on the business card.
It's the Rock With You drum fill.
The Rock With You drum fill.
Business card.
I was like, wait a minute. That's actually a thing right there.
That is JR. We see you, bro.
Okay.
We see you.
You got A's. I don't know if I could get an 8-bar phrase on the Let's Dance thing on one side of a business card. I haven't tried that yet.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think you should. I think you should consider it. Can we talk business for a second?
Oh, okay.
And then we can wrap it up. I think it's very important to talk about. So obviously the music industry's changed immensely from the 70s into the 80s, into the 90s. Now we're here today. You're still doing sessions. So back in the I don't know if we want to go to this. Let's say the 80s. Back in the 80s, what was the business model back then for being a session drummer like yourself, like recording versus touring? Like, what was like market rate for per song or however you would charge back then?
Okay, so yeah, there was definitely a union rate that was established by the AFM, the American Federation of Musicians. And they had agreements with all the labels about what this rate for a 3-hour session should be. And over the years, I kind of remember it in the late 70s, early 80s being like $50 an hour. Then it went up to $75 an hour. Then it went up to, it just with over the years and with a 3-hour minimum kind of a thing. But then the musicians that were kind of more in demand could make deals that were beyond the scale rates. And so you would hear stuff like double scale, triple scale, and then if a musician played more than one instrument, they would call that a double. So if I played drums and percussion, or drums and keyboards, or drums and I programmed a drum machine, or drums and whatever, right? That would be, I'm doubling on that session. So, if I could get double or triple scale plus a double for another instrument. So that would affect how you would get paid. Then there would be a different scale for television. And built into the television scale was a scale for reruns of a particular show. So like in the case of David Sanborn's Night Music that was on a major network, NBC or whatever it was back then, I think the union rate contract was the first two reruns paid 100%. The second 2 or 3 reruns paid 75%. The next, any subsequent reruns after that were 50% of the original. So there was a lot of money in the industry. And then they established what they call the Special Payments Fund, that the AFM was able to negotiate a bonus for participating union members, musicians, where they would get a bonus that was like a pool created by the labels that they would pay into, like a bonus thing that would be divided among those performing musicians that played on those records. And so that would end up being a nice kind of bonus payment.
Which they still do.
Which they
still
still
have
do.
that special payments fund.
Yeah, they
it's
call
smaller.
special payments fund, and there's in Europe neighboring rights payments and these sort of things. So, unfortunately, the influence of the union and how people make records has shifted because people young kids make records on laptops, and the just the style of production and the tools that are used shifted, which shifted the entire industry, which also shifted how everybody consumes music.
Back in the 80s, 90s, whatever. So you were pretty much charging whatever scale was, or double scale or whatever. It wasn't like a $1,000 a song situation. It was more based off time.
Yeah, it was based off of time. But then the musicians that would really elevate themselves and played on a lot of hits, sometimes you just got to a point where you could ask for a flat fee that was way beyond the scale, because the artist would want Steve Gadd to come into the studio, or whoever, right? Who would play, and Steve played on a bunch of hits, right? So he was beyond scale. I got
he was a brand pricing.
Yeah, I also I was able to get to that point as well as a session player because I had played on so many hits.
Figured.
So it was a great moment. And we put the work in and we put the time in, and it was an interesting, but it was also supported by a tremendous sales business. Back then we were it was the sales of people were into collecting music. They were into owning their collection. People, once the habit of consumption changed from owning your library to access to a library. That shifted things, and also shifted the formula for payment. Not as favorable as it was back in the day.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But I think the labels benefited because what streaming platforms needed was content. And when you look at Universal and Sony and Columbia and Arista and RCA, BMG, and now, everybody's kind of organized under these umbrellas of labels. Well, when they consolidate their assets, we're talking 100 years of recorded assets, that are sitting on servers that you and I could pick up our phone and we could type in Louis Jordan's name, or we can type in Louis Armstrong's name, or Ray Charles' name, or Duke Ellington's name as quick as we could type in Dua Lipa or Sting or a new artist of today, and this stuff is just sitting there waiting for you to listen to it on this.
Yeah. The labels definitely won the streaming war. I mean, the streamers won, Spotify won. And then the labels were the second beneficiary, and the artists are below that, and the musicians are way below that.
And it's really a question of who owns masters. Master ownership is really what drives this. And because the labels, a lot of the records that were made over the last 80 to 100 years were a lot of times works for hire. And basically it was everybody's understanding that the sound recording copyright was owned by the labels.
Yes. Oh, yes.
They paid to have these records made. The only maybe unfair deal, like when artists started to wake up, they realized that they would get the cost of the record recouped out of their royalties, but then they still wouldn't own it in the end. The label still retained the ownership. But on another hand, it's tough, man. It's a tough business because there are, as tough as it was for some artists, a lot of artists did benefit from the construct.
Yep.
And so, it's a sensitive conversation to have, because there are some people that have wildly benefited, even with the formula as it is. from the construct. So
Yeah, absolutely.
it's interesting. It's interesting. I don't have answers. I just have questions.
I always ask I want to find all this out.
Yeah.
I love talking about like market rate because I get asked all the time, like, what's market rate for this tour? Oh, I'm doing a theater tour, but we're headlining, or I'm doing an arena tour, but we're opening, you know, what's the market rate?
Yeah,
what's the market? And like, so I always try to help as many people as possible with what I think they should be charging or whatever, whenever they ask me, at least. For advice. Because a lot of people don't know, especially the young musicians get their first break. They're like, I don't know. You find out that they're on an arena tour headlining and they're getting like $2,000 a week, and you're like, oh my god, you're getting taken advantage of horribly, or $2,500, like, you know, like, or even $4,000 if you should be getting more than that. You're headlining.
You know, I always say when you're looking at a contract in your right hand, have a calculator in your left hand.
Yeah,
it's that simple. And when I read my first contract with a calculator in my hand, I was like, holy crap, like, whoa. And I never wanted to sign another record deal after that again.
Oh man, yeah. And then record deal, that's a whole other thing. Yeah.
I didn't want to sign it. Now I like the idea of licensing, but I'm
for sure.
I'm all about kind of retaining the ownership of my masters.
Absolutely.
And that's why I have this studio, because for the last 35 years, everything that I've recorded since like after my first Rhythm Deep album, I've recorded in my own studio.
Amazing.
And I learned how to do this so that for freedom. This was freedom for me.
For freedom, exactly.
For freedom. That's all. I don't want to look at a clock. I want to take my time. You know, I don't want to, have that kind of pressure and then have some weird recoup schedule on the budget that they gave me, and all of that. I'd rather just make the investment in the gear, enjoy the process, because for me it's about the process, and this is what I'm doing is not unusual. I mean, there were guys in the 70s that were doing this,
Yeah.
The guy who had the band Boston, what was his name? Tom.
The singer of Boston?
The guitarist, the leader.
Oh, the guitar player, right. Oh, man. Well, actually, my buddy's making a documentary on him right now. I don't know
yeah, so here's a guy did the same thing. He put the gear in his house and he made the record.
Tom.
You know what I mean? Because you want to have the control over what you're doing. You want to
Yes.
It's art. So you want to, by having your own palette and your own tools, you can really enjoy the process. And so I did this because I love the process.
I love it.
You know what I mean?
So here we are today. How are you spending most of your time these days? How do you divide it? What's going where?
Well, I'm doing sessions here and there.
Mm-hmm.
I have a new band project that I started about a year and a half ago. Maybe actually more like 2 years now. It's called Sonic Boom Squad, and it's a fun kind of like funky rock record. And what happened? It's an interesting story, because when I got done with the Taylor Hawkins tribute shows with the Foo Fighters and all those guests,
which was so cool that you did that.
Yeah, and so we were like, I came home and it was a fun experience, and then I was like, I had another project that I was doing with Kurt Rosenwinkel and Lindley Marth and Rachel, my wife, on keys, called Osmosis. So we were kind of in between writing and trying to figure out the direction of that project. And then one night I sat down in front of the fireplace, and because I had some lyric ideas, and it was funny because I sat down at like 9 at night, and then but the ideas kept coming. So I said, I'm just going to sit here until this stops. I'm not going to get up until it stops. And it didn't stop until about 5 a.m.
Wow.
And I got up and I had like 8 or 9 songs written, like lyrics, not music, just words, just like verses, choruses. And I was like, wow, this was interesting. Like that never happened to me. So I decided for the next month or two that I was just going to hole up in this room, and I was just going to record each of these ideas one at a time. But I wasn't going to overthink it.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'm not going to overthink it. And In fact, I had a fun talk with one of my buddies in LA, this drummer named Dave Tweedy. I don't know if you know Dave Tweedy.
Oh yeah, Dave's an amazing drummer. Yeah.
Okay, so Dave says to me, what happens if you just stay in one stream of consciousness and don't like allow yourself to go all over the place and we were just having a conversation about production and, you know, songwriting and, you know, being musicians that do a lot of eclectic stuff. You know, his lady is a super singer, keyboard player that worked with Stevie Wonder. Victoria. So we have these talks about, you know, like record production and songwriting, and they hang with us. And when we go to LA, I hang with them, and Rachel and I hang out with them a lot. But this was a fun conversation. So on the heels of that talk with Dave, I was like, you know, I think I'm going to take Dave's advice on this, and I'm just going to like start this project, but I'm going to keep it focused down one pipeline here, which is like revisiting my love of rock and funk music and what I loved most about Sly and what I loved most about like Parliament and what I loved most about the Beatles when I loved like, but like that sort of blend of everything that shaped my mind as a kid from like, you know, Sly to Mother's Finest to, you know, a lot of the music of that time period.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening was like I pulled out my guitar and I started coming up with some riffs, and then some melodies started happening. And I would, instead of playing the drums, I would beatbox drums so that I wouldn't get bogged down with recording drums first.
Yeah.
I could hear the groove in my head. So beatbox it into my system with a click into this mic, and then play guitar in that, you know, improvise some melodies, and then go play drums on it because it's all on a click. And then I just started building a record, and I stayed in it. And in 8 weeks, I finished an album, which I never did before. And that's what I told my buddy, Mr. Tweedy. I was like, all right, that was good advice, because normally I would take 3 years to make a record. I'd go on the road and then I'd come back and I forgot where I was. And then you know what I mean? And so the songs would kind of, you know, be eclectic. It's still me, but it's still kind of like a little bit all over the place and
different timelines.
Different timelines. The sound might change a little bit.
Yeah.
And so
it's really interesting because it's like, yeah, once you break that and you allow the first tour to happen or whatever, then now there's no like cap on when you're ending this, and it can go for years.
Yeah.
The project.
Exactly. So I was like, all right, I'm just gonna stay in this. And so that's what I did. And so and then I started recording vocals, and so it ends up, so the Sonic, and I didn't name it Sonic Boom Squad right away. I had an agent who took it around, and we weren't really satisfied with kind of the deal offers we were getting. And then I was like, all right, well, I need to take my name off of this, kind of rebrand it something else, because people know me for so many different things. It's like, what the heck is he doing now? You know? So I thought by figuring out a name for it, it would differentiate it from everything else that I'm doing.
Yes.
So by calling it Omar Hakim's Sonic Boom Squad and then putting the music out, it would be like, okay, this is definitely something different from what he's ever done before.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so that's on the record, that's me playing guitars, playing all the keys, doing all the vocals.
Wow.
That's the record. But then I needed to put a band together, and I called my buddy Paul Pesco from Madonna days.
Yeah.
And Paul is, you know, he's MD'd a lot of things and was with Hall & Oates for years. He's great guitarist, understands pop music, understands rock music. And so when I called him out of the blue, I said, what do you think, man? You know, I think this would fit you, and, you know, can you help me do this? And he was like, heck yeah, I can help you do it. And so he kind of helped me, you know, put it together. We found another drummer so that I'm not stuck behind the kit the whole time. Sometimes I'm out front, sometimes I'm at the kit. You know, we started with the amazing Gene Lake on drums. We have a kid now who sings and plays named Tope, Paul Pesco. The bass player on the record is Jerry Brooks. The bass player live is Jonathan Toscano, who works with my jazz trio project with Rachel.
Nice.
And then Rachel's playing keys. And we have 2 background singers, Samora and Charlene. And we've been playing gigs. We had a fun gig the other night at the Newton Theater in Newton, New Jersey. It was really lovely. And
you got to let me know. You got to let me know when you come to LA.
I will, man. I mean, it's funny because it started a while ago, but I think it was good that things didn't happen fast because it gave me an opportunity to kind of like get comfortable with being the front guy.
Yeah, for sure.
Not hiding behind a bunch of drums and cymbals and, coming out front and kind of being the storyteller. So this has been an interesting challenge for me.
Yeah.
But it's been fun. And people are digging the music, and the music is starting to make its way out into the world even more. So a couple of videos will be coming out soon. Vernon Reid played on the last single, which is called "To Be With You." He did a great guitar solo on it. So we're having fun with that. But then I produced this lovely acoustic jazz record for my wife Rachel Z called "Sensual." That came out about 18 months ago. We've been touring around that. So that one's kind of billed as Rachel Z with special guests, me, and Jonathan Toscano. And so that's been a fun tour because that's very different. That's all acoustic piano, upright bass, very improvisational.
Fun.
Kind of like, doing my jazz roots and looking at that language. So I think what I'm enjoying about these moments the most is that I'm just enjoying my entire musical energy. Like I think back in the day, people with the labels and people that are looking at things more commercially would say, oh, well, you can't do that. You can't be a jazz musician and a rock musician, or you can't be that kind of artist but then be that kind, because you're going to confuse the audience. And we're not in that business anymore as far as I'm so for me, I'm just trying to enjoy my musical life at the end of the day.
Yes, man. Beautiful.
And my musical life, it's going to have some funk and some rock and some jazz and some, it's going to have all that.
Of course, because you are Omar Hakim. You got to hit it all, man. Come on now. Man, well, dude, thank you so much for taking the time. I really enjoyed this. I feel like I understand the journey so much better.
Wow. Cool.
And you're super inspiring, man. And we gotta hang in person next time you're in town. Please.
Yeah, for sure, man. Let's do that.
Or next time I'm over there, I'll text you too.
Right on.
And send my love to Rachel.
I will.
Come on, everybody. Make a ton of noise. Omar Hakim. The most perfect hi-hat opens of all time. I'm taking that to the grave. Just Omar Hakim. You have sculpted me, my friend. We love you,
man.
Omar.
That's funny.
Thank you, bro.
Right on. Thank you very much.
Go with Elmo. 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 This is the stuff, man.